Dave, now that we're all connected, we're ready to get started when you are, I believe. All right, I believe we are now live. So good evening. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Pinole Planning Commission on September 9th, 2024. At this time, I am now calling the meeting to order. Before I go through roll call and the rest of it, I'm going to go through the standard meeting information. You can submit public comments in person by attending the meeting at the Pinole City Council chambers, filling out a yellow public comment card and submitting it to Justin Schuse. I don't think there's anybody from the city clerk's office here tonight. Or via Zoom, you can submit a live remote public comment via Zoom video conferencing. You can download that app from the Apple App Store, Google Play. The hyperlink to join that is https://us02web.zom.us/j/86505375301. You can also join by phone by dialing 1-669-900-6833 or 1-253-215-8782 or 1-346-248-7799 and entering the webinar ID, which is 865-0537-5301. Speakers will be asked to provide their name and city of residence, although providing this is not required for participation. Each speaker will be afforded up to 5 minutes to speak. Speakers will be muted until their opportunity to provide public comment. When the chair opens the comment period for the item you wish to speak upon, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if connecting via telephone, which will alert staff that you have a comment to provide, and press *6 to unmute. To comment with your video enabled, please let city staff know you would like to turn your camera on once you are called to speak. If you'd like to submit a written comment, ideally you would submit public comments to planning staff before the meeting via email to dhanham@pinole.gov. Please include your full name, city of residence, and the agenda item that you are commenting on. There are also other ways you can watch the meeting. It is broadcast live on Channel 26 and retelecast the following week. The Community TV Channel 26 schedule is published on the city's website at www.pinole.gov. It is also video streamed live on the city's website, www.pinole.gov/department/pinole-tv, and remain archived on the site for 5 years. If none of these options are available to you or you need assistance with public comment, please contact Planning Manager David Hanham at 510-724-8912 or dhanham@pinole.gov. Americans with Disabilities Act. In compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, if you need special assistance to participate in a city meeting or you need a copy of the agenda or the agenda packet in an appropriate alternative format, please contact the City Clerk's office at 510-724-8928. Notification at least 48 hours prior to the meeting or time when services are needed will assist the city staff in ensuring that reasonable arrangements can be made to provide accessibility to the meeting or service. Note, staff reports are available for inspection on the city website at www.pinole.gov. You may also contact the city clerk via email at hbell@pinole.gov. Citizen participation. Persons wishing to speak on an item listed on the agenda may do so when the chair asks for comments in favor of or in opposition to the item under consideration. After all of those persons wishing to speak have done so, the hearing will be closed and the matter will be discussed among the commission prior to rendering a decision. Any person may appeal an action of the Planning Commission or of the planning manager by filing an appeal with the city clerk in writing within 10 days of such action. Following a public hearing, the City Council may act to confirm, modify, or reverse the action of the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission may act to confirm, modify, or reverse the action of the Planning Manager. The cost to appeal a decision is $500 and a minimum $2,500 deposit fee. Note, if you challenge a decision of the Commission regarding a project in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing or in writing delivered to the City of Pinole at or prior to the public hearing. Ralph M. Brown Act, Government Code, Section 54950. In enacting this chapter, the legislature finds and declares that public boards, public commissions, boards, and councils of the other public agencies of the state exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. It is the intent of the law that their actions be taken openly and that their deliberations be conducted openly. The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people, in delegating authority, do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. Now, can you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Following this, we have our land acknowledgement. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Ohlone people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Ohlone land, the land that Pinole sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. And now, can we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Huey,
Present.
Commissioner Uch,
Present.
Commissioner Sandoval,
Present.
Commissioner Lamb Julian,
Present.
Commissioner Bender,
Present.
Vice Chair Martinez.
Present.
Okay, Alex, do we need to go through the process of letting him know where he is and how he's participating in this process? Okay, so Vice Chair Martinez, you're going to have to stipulate where you are located at this time, and if there's any other adults over the age of 18 located in your presence or in the room where you are at.
I am currently at my hotel in Burlington, Vermont, and I am the only adult or the only individual in my hotel room. Thank you.
Is there anything else I need to add there? Okay. And then Chair Minnis.
Present, and I believe this will be the time where I usually state ex parte communications. I made the usual ex parte communication to my email list covering this meeting as well as the various other events coming up in the city, and I also spoke directly with Vice Chair Martinez about the procedures for connecting remotely and some of the topics we're going to discuss this evening. And with that, we are now moving on to citizens to be heard. The public may address the Planning Commission on items that are within its jurisdiction, not otherwise listed on the agenda. Planning commissioners may discuss the matter brought to their attention, but by state law, the Ralph M. Brown Act, actions must be deferred to a future meeting. The time allowed is 5 minutes each. Do we have any persons wishing to make a public comment under citizens to be heard?
Yes, I do see one number online, the caller with the number ending in 5748. When you're ready, please press *6 to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, my name's Anthony, and I'm a longtime citizen, senior citizen resident of Pinole of over 45 years. And I had a few questions or statements, comments. On behalf of myself and other people that live in and around or travel through Pinole Valley and Pinole Valley Road, I'd like to address the question on what recently had the city been issued an edict by the Planning Commission or the one of the staff members or the acting city manager / police chief, no longer, thank goodness, and or the TAPS committee that wasn't made aware of all these approximately 24 brand new stop signs, excuse me, not stop signs, but no parking signs up and down Pinole Valley Road on both sides of the street on the sidewalk, taking up public sidewalk space, distracting drivers, basically littering Pinole Valley Road with excess signage. I think there should be a sign ordinance that should be placed on the agenda and or discussed at a future meeting if you don't have the answer at this meeting to why that happened. You know, it's never happened like for 40 plus years, and people are saying in the city that the city of Pinole doesn't have the staff or the time or the wherewithal, if not the knowledge. They got the funds to put those signs up at several hundreds of dollars or several $1,000s to put up those 24 no parking signs on both sides of the street, and they're red curbed already. They just need refurbishing maybe once or twice a year with red paint, but red paint would be not enough for the city of Pinole. They had to put signs up instead, and it's every 100 to 150 feet. We have a sign like that up and down Pinole Valley Road, and maybe it makes it easier on the police, and maybe that was one of the reasons, because they don't want to give people tickets or more warnings before they, as they double park or park there, waiting for the school kids or waiting for their friends by the library, by the high school, by the Trader Joe's shopping center, by Red Onion, the crossover bridge, and up and down past 7-Eleven. And then the other question I had for the Planning Commission or the planning manager is who authorized the somewhat major destruction and renovation of the Adobe Road trail behind the caretaker's house over the last 2 weeks. You know, they've had a big backhoe tractor back there. I guess it's like, I didn't see the dump trucks because I wasn't there early in the morning, but the city of Pinole, and it was verified by 2 different people that attend the dog park area, that it was the Pinole Public Works employee that was pushing around dirt. And when asked whether he was with the county or the city or the or the state, he just said, "Oh, we're with the city of Pinole." And I said, "Well, what kind of project are you having on that bike walking trail behind the dog park?" And he laughed in response, and he just said, "Oh, I'm just pushing around dirt today." And they were dumping and pushing around dirt on the trail, causing a disfiguration to the trail. It's like a roller coaster ride out there on more than half of the trail. And I have it witnessed and pictured by several people if you need, but there's no signs there saying that there was a project going on. And I think in the future that the city should have a
You have
ordinance,
30 seconds remaining.
a sign ordinance that if you have a major project going on in the city, they should let the people know, like the construction signs that Caltrans does or the city does behind the left field ballpark fence of Fernandez Park, they should put a sign there that says this is one of your tax dollar major sewage projects going on. That's still not signed, and it's still being blocked off there behind Fernandez Baseball Park. And what's happening to that trail behind the dog park? There's no signage there, but they're basically littering
Can you
and
please
breaking the
conclude your
Pinole
comments?
Municipal Code for no dumping and no littering on that trail. It's about half a dozen or more big dump trucks of old asphalt, dirt, and rubble, and they also dumped it behind the caretaker's house on the caretaker property's house. And what's happening to that property at the caretaker's house? The status of that? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments for citizens to be heard?
No, there are no other public comments.
All right. So, Mr. Hannum, are you able to answer any of the commenters' questions at this time?
No, I'm not. So I'd have to follow up with the Public Works Director to see what's happening back there behind the trail and also regarding the new signs that are going up. So we'll have to check with them and get back to the commission on that.
All right, so we'll make a note to follow up on that in the future, because I know there was something similar that we had to follow up on at the last meeting, but we can talk about that when we get to minutes.
If I may, are the parking signs on Pinole Road due to the high school's homecoming parade? Potentially?
Well, I don't know if they're permanent signs or if they're just, yeah, it could be for the homecoming parade that's coming up, because I know they do that every year. So I'm not sure if these are portable signs or they're actually signs that are going up on like on the sidewalk that would say no parking. So
Yeah,
I'd have to check
It's
that
around
out.
that time of year.
Yeah, so
that
it-
might explain it.
Yeah, it might be homecoming. You're right.
Okay, but yeah, if we could get an answer to that, that would probably be helpful. And did any of the other commissioners have any comments? All right, so with that, I'll close out citizens to be heard, and we'll move on to the meeting minutes. I have a couple of comments on the minutes. On the final page, page number 6, line number 14, it says Chairperson Menace and the Planning Commission expressed its appreciation. I think probably there would be the more appropriate sort of plural pronoun. Its reads a bit awkwardly. And on line 29, it says Chairperson Menace reported the low-income food distribution. And what I actually said was the low-income seniors food distribution. And you can check the video recording of the meeting at 1 hour, 30 minutes, 13 seconds to confirm that. I made sure to go back and listen just to make sure I didn't forget that I said that. Aside from that, I don't have any other points to raise with regards to the minutes. Are there any other comments that other commissioners wish to make with regards to the minutes? Commissioner Sandoval? Commissioner Lamb-Julian? Commissioner Hui? Commissioner Uch? Commissioner Bender?
No.
Vice Chair Martinez?
None. None.
All right, then I'd like to request a motion to adopt the draft minutes of the regular meeting of the Pinole Planning Commission of August 12, 2024 with my suggested amendments.
I can second that.
All right, so I guess that motion was made by me, seconded by Commissioner Sandoval. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, we can. Commissioner Huey,
Yes.
Commissioner Uch,
Yes.
Commissioner Sandoval,
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb-Julian,
Yes.
Commissioner Bender,
Yes.
Vice Chair Martinez.
Abstain.
Do you say abstain? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Chair Menace.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0-1 with Commissioner Martinez abstaining.
All right, and with that, we are now moving on to a public hearing. At the beginning of the item, I will read the description of that item as stated on the agenda. City staff will then give a brief presentation of the proposed project. The commission may then ask staff questions about the item. For those items listed as public hearings, the chair will open the public hearing and ask the applicant if they wish to make a presentation. Those persons in favor of the project will then be given an opportunity to speak, followed by those who are opposed to the project. The applicant will then be given an opportunity for rebuttal. The public hearing will then be closed, and the commission may discuss the item among themselves and ask questions of staff. The commission will then vote to approve, deny, approve in a modified form, or continue the matter to a later date for a decision. The chair will announce the commission's decision and advise the audience of the appeal procedure. Note that no public hearings will begin after 11 p.m. Items still remaining on the agenda after 11 p.m. will be held over to the next meeting. So our first item is PA 24-01, Municipal Code and Specific Plan Amendments for Housing Element Implementation and Regulatory Consistency. So I believe that Justin Chu is going to be given the staff presentation for this item.
Yes, thank you, Chair Manis. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I'm Senior Planner Justin Shu. So the item before you tonight is a modification of the municipal code and specific plan amendments, largely driven from the housing element update that we conducted last year as a city, and also a few modifications for regulatory consistency and just clarity in our code as well. If we could move to the next slide, please. Just to give a bit of background, tonight we're here to look at some text amendments from the Pinole Municipal Code, specifically the zoning code that regulates much of the zoning and development standards in the city, as well as allowable land uses, as well as modifications in the three-quarter specific plan, which is another regulatory document. There are a few other modifications as well in the code, and then City Council would take all of the considerations from Planning Commission into consideration to adopt those changes, the municipal code, zoning code, and the specific plan. So just to give a broader overview, a lot of these changes are motivated by the adoption of the housing element from last year. As many of you might remember, the housing element is one component of the city's general plan, and this is the general plan establishes the policies and programs for the city, and the zoning code and the specific plan are sort of like the implementation tools to implement the general plan, to bring those policies into fruition in how we review development, when it comes in, and how it's built out, or how land uses or land is used. So this update to text in the Pinole Municipal Code, as well as the specific plan, are directed by a few of the programs in the housing element that was adopted last year. So the housing element covers 2023 to 2031. That's the 8-year cycle for a lot of the Bay Area jurisdictions. Within those programs, the city would make certain changes over that period to ensure we're implementing our housing element and doing our part to provide for development opportunities within the city, but also contributing region-wide and statewide as well. So a lot of these programs are for consistency with a lot of the state and federal laws, a lot of the housing laws, and for furtherance of housing element programs as well. So many of these programs target updates to the zoning code, which is Title 17 in the Pinole Municipal Code. This covers development standards, basically like how you would construct on a lot, as well as land use standards, like how you would use land on the lot as well. There are also updates to the specific plan because for certain areas in the city, mainly the San Pablo Avenue corridor, the Abian Way corridor, and Pinole Valley Road corridor, there are special development standards and land uses that apply just to those areas to promote build out of those areas in certain ways envisioned in the specific plan. So whatever wouldn't be covered in the zoning code would be covered in the specific plan. So changes were also needed in the specific plan to ensure consistency in certain policies that the zoning code doesn't touch upon. We wanted to make sure that the specific plan would touch upon those. There are also some additional other revisions outside the zoning code, which you might have noticed in the packet as well. These would be adopted by council, but they're also tangentially related to some of the things we're covering tonight as well. So the staff is including those as part of the whole package for this first round of updates. And I mentioned first round of updates because the housing element does contain programs with a number of different edits. This is the first component of them, and then in the coming months, Planning Commission will see further edits as well. So a lot of the edits here are for consistency with state law and also to further the housing element. But it's mostly to ensure that we're consistent, our language is clear, and that people coming to the city aren't confused by dated standards. So as I mentioned, City Council would ultimately adopt all of the changes in the municipal code or the specific plan. Planning Commission's role tonight is just to review, discuss, and examine the proposed changes by staff to see if you might make further modifications or if you wanted to adopt, or not adopt, but if the changes look fine as is. So you would provide a recommendation to City Council at a future public hearing for whether Planning Commission is recommending adoption or recommending adoption with some changes discussed tonight. If we could go to the next slide. So I'm going to provide an overview of the amendments. They're also covered in the staff report as well. The staff report is fairly detailed in some of the code references, so I'm hoping to provide just kind of an overview of what it's saying. You could probably derive that from the staff report, but I'm hoping this could provide a chance to look at it in simpler terms, and if you have questions, I'll be available later to discuss and answer those as well. So the first section I want to touch upon is amendments to Chapter 5.12. This is actually outside the zoning code, but it relates to family daycare homes, which are discussed in the zoning code. This was also a requested revision as well from comments that we've heard. Essentially, the change to 5.12 is that family daycare homes are exempt from business license fees. So that's something that's already in state law. We're clarifying that in our codes. Just a point to touch upon as well is that the city implements the zoning code as it's stated, but where there's differences with state law, state law would overrule some of those. So in cases where there have been discrepancies in the past, staff would refer to state law, would direct applicants or anyone with questions to follow state law as well and provide clarifications on what those differences are. And with these code amendments, hopefully that clarifies things and ensures there's a lot fewer confusion, or a lot less confusion if that might come up as well. So 5.12 would be a section that City Council would consider for adoption. So not related to zoning per se, but tangentially touches upon things in zoning. Chapter 17.20 is allowed land use and requirements. This is in the zoning code. So some of the modifications include multifamily residential permit types. These are updated, so it's a cleanup to ensure that multifamily residential is noted as a permitted use in both OPMU and OIMU zoning districts in the zoning code to reflect the specific plan. The reason for this change is there are no OPMU or OIMU outside the specific plan, so it makes sense for our zoning code to reflect the permitted uses in the specific plan. Large family daycare homes have also been updated in their permitting status. They are supposed to be treated the same, which is that they're permitted uses by right in residential zones. So we have been implementing this. People have come with questions before, and staff has directed them that large and small are both permitted uses in residential zoning districts since they're treated as residential uses. So this is just a cleanup to clarify that and ensure we're consistent with state law. Group residential and group home does have a permitted, it's in the land use table for where it's permitted in various zoning districts. Through this update, we've prepared a more detailed explanation for what group homes are. Even though we had it listed before, we didn't have a definition really. So part of that was establishing that definition and also implementing some of the requirements that we committed to doing in our housing elements, such as making them permitted in the R district. And we've also updated them so that they're permitted in the RMU and CMU districts, consistent with some similar types of residential uses that are permitted in those districts as well. Residential care facilities are permitted in our OPMU and OIMU districts. This is also where other residential uses are permitted by right. So low barrier navigation centers were added to the allowable use tables. They have been noted as being permitted in mixed use and non-residential districts where multifamily residential is permitted. This is something we wanted to do in the housing element, so we are implementing that here with these changes. Also from the housing element, we committed to changing manufactured homes to a permitted use in the RMU district. They were already permitted in a number of other districts, so this is kind of in line with permitting in other zoning districts as well. And last, for this part at least, we changed some of the permitting status for residential or religious institutions to ensure that they have the same permitting requirements as clubs, lodges, and private meeting halls in the same district. So essentially, religious institutions for gathering places, as well as like secular institutions, have the same permitting status. And this is required by federal law. If we could go to the next slide. So we have updated a number of allowed use definitions as well, although there have been a lot of markings in these sections, as you might have scrolled through. A lot of them are referring to definitions in state law and specifically have state law references. So if something changes, people could also reference the state law code as well for the specific language. But yeah, we've included further references in our definitions. We've also added, as mentioned, definitions for group home and group residential, as well as low barrier navigation centers. The definition for the group residential and group homes were based on technical assistance memos from HCD. So that's what guided that. Moving on to the next chapter, chapter 17.38 is the density bonus chapter. You may notice in your packet that there is a complete chapter that's just red text. This is because the existing density bonus chapter is being replaced completely by this new revision. The purpose of this complete overhaul and revision is due in large part to changes in state law and especially density bonus that seem to have been updated year after year for the past couple of years or so. So to ensure continuing consistency, we have adopted and redesigned the chapter so that it references state law by reference for the base requirements. You might also notice that there have been other additions as well. So in complying with some of the other programs that we wanted to do in the housing element, or that we've committed to doing in the housing element, we've also added additional procedural explanations and also additional incentives to the housing element density bonus that would be available for development applications. So these changes include revising all the density approvals so that they line up with the appropriate level of project entitlements, which means that if a project requires planning commission approval for construction of a multifamily residence, like an apartment, the density bonus approval would go together with those. So those are all packaged together in the same approval package. And the reason for not just referring to planning commission is that there could be instances, just based on state law, where projects might require just ministerial approval instead of discretionary approval, in which case planning commission might not be involved in those approvals. So the language is essentially to line up with the project approval of density bonus just lines up with whatever the approval authority is, rather than stating planning commission. For most projects, for comprehensive design review, it does go to planning commission, but in those cases where it doesn't go to planning commission, we have this to cover for it. Additionally, one of our housing element programs was to investigate a density bonus beyond state law for the provision of senior housing. We've noted 10% just as a starting mark. This is something we've discussed with HCD before, and they seem to take to that percentage. Of course, that percentage could be increased as well, should planning commission or especially city council in this meeting, further meetings, whatever it may be, want to investigate a higher density bonus. But for now, it seems like 10% would be a good starting point to consider. If we could go to the next slide, please. So chapter 17.61 is a completely new chapter, low barrier navigation centers. This is basically drawn almost completely from state law, and then we included some processing procedures as well, based on how we would take these in. Yeah, it's mostly just drawn from state law, and we needed to include something in our code. And we've also committed to doing this in our housing element program. Chapter 17.62 is regarding emergency shelters. So this includes a few updates just to ensure we're complying with the current state law requirements, including clarifying that designing emergency shelters should only be based on review of objective standards. So there's no longer a discretionary component or a subjective component to it. For chapter 17.98, glossary of terms, we updated a few definitions for household and for family. We were going to do this as part of a housing element update. I've also provided a separate handout as well, and I'll read a proposed modification. as well. So in the packet, we had included an initial definition for what family would be. So staff is recommending a planning commission consider further modifications consistent with the modification handout to expand the definition of family, just to ensure we're consistent with housing element guidelines. So the recommendation is to consider further modification of the family definition and to read all persons living in a household, whether or not related by blood, marriage, or adoption, as the family definition. And finally, we propose some edits to the specific plan land use tables and definitions. This is specifically in Chapter 6 of the 3-corridor specific plan, and includes modifications of tables 6.2, 6.8, and 6.14, which list the allowable land uses. So these updates are mostly for cleanup and consistency with the housing element and zoning code updates that we've proposed here as well. And if we go to the next slide. So the project has been evaluated for CEQA, and we've determined that the amendments are exempt from the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, based on the rules set forth in CEQA Guidelines Section 15061B3. That CEQA applies only to projects that have potential for causing significant effect on the environment. So as these are code updates and text updates, and there's no direct connection to a project being proposed, this section would apply. If there was a project proposed, it would be evaluated based on CEQA at that time. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the staff recommendation is for Planning Commission after holding this public hearing to adopt recommendation resolution 24-05, recommending to City Council the adoption of proposed municipal code and specific plan amendments as proposed in resolution 24-05, attachment A, exhibit A, or with additional recommendations for revisions provided by Planning Commission. And staff also wants to add to please consider the modification that has been brought before you by staff today as well. So with that, staff concludes their presentation, and if you have any questions or comments, I'm available to answer them. Thank you.
All right, so I guess I'll start with Commissioner Bender this time. Commissioner Bender, do you have any questions for staff on this item?
Yes, I do. I'll start with on page 34, under affordable units, it was item F, about local preference. I'm just curious, is that actually part of state law, that there is local preference? I tried to look back to the existing density bonus section, and I couldn't find it, and maybe I missed that. I'm just curious about this local preference.
Yeah, it is not part of state law. Many local jurisdictions have that kind of requirement. Pinole has implemented that kind of requirement when it can on a case-by-case basis when the agreements have gone to the city council. So, you know, the Vista Woods, that's a bad example, but some of the other market rate developments that have had density bonuses in them, you know, percentage affordable. In the agreement, we've put that local preference, and so we're incorporating it into our ordinance as well, so that it will, you know, everyone will know about it ahead of time when they apply. And
Okay.
we'll do that.
My next question would be based on page 35, the application review. I'm going to ask sort of a theoretical question or hypothetical, because as was outlined in very plain English under attachment B, that the approving body for the density bonus will be the Planning Commission. In the past, of course, it's always been, it would include a lot of times the City Council. My hypothetical is, if under these changes, as well as other things that have happened in state law regarding changing commercial properties to residential, would something like 1500 Fitzgerald, would that, since that was a density bonus project, I believe, I wasn't on the planning commission at that time, but would that be an example of a project which, if it came today, would go to just the planning commission and not council?
Yeah, so if that project was, would come today, it would just go to the planning commission. The reason that particular project went to the city council was that our code had this language regarding the density bonus requirement. The density bonus needing to be approved by the city council. And part of the reason we took that out is, like Justin said, you know, really density bonus is on, for the most part, are not discretionary. They've really narrowed from the time they were first implemented, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago to now. The state has really taken away the ability of councils or cities to deny density bonuses, and so it seems sort of odd to require something to go to the council to talk about an issue that they don't really have the ability to say yes or no to and are forced their hand under state law. Of course, someone can always appeal the project too if they're not happy with the planning commission's determination.
Okay. Thank you. Final is just a note on page 47 under 17.62.020 permit requirements and exceptions. In the last sentence, it says basically shall comply with all federal and California licensing requirements and all applicable uniform building and fire codes. California is actually under the California Building Code, not the uniform. The uniform is basically what's considered a model code, but it would be the California Building Code. And that's it.
If I may, just one to slightly correct something I had mentioned earlier. You were correct that our existing density bonus ordinance doesn't reference a local preference, but our existing inclusionary housing ordinance does reference a local preference.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Right, and there was also a segment in basically the old version that was attached as part of this documentation that talked about that. I can hunt it down later once it gets to my turn in the cycle. So Commissioner Rouge, do you have any questions for staff?
Yeah, sorry. I have one question on number 11, group residential and home / home on the definition. So I've seen here, comparing it to existing definitions on like multifamily units in which, in terms of ownership,
To
whether...
intercede briefly, which page are you on?
Sorry, page 29.
Thank you.
And I'll just refer into definitions how a lot of the, when it comes to housing, the units could either be owned individually or by a landlord. And I'm asking if under group 11, does that include, in a sense, co-op housing in which all the tenants collectively run the building, essentially serving as a function of a landlord, but instead the people in it more democratically run it? Because what I'm seeing here, most of these apply to more vulnerable and specialized groups. And does that fit in? Does that get lumped in with this section under, I guess, basically co-op housing? Would it fall under this definition?
I think this is more geared towards those sorts of residential homes that are defined under state law, which are run by the different or overseen by the different state agencies for like recovery or for special care that's provided as well. The definition is pretty broad. I think there are just a lot of different agencies that run different programs that oversee these types of homes. So the definition itself is also pretty broad and expansive too.
If I can interject briefly, it also looks to me as though item 11A, talking about shared living residences, might potentially cover that subcategory because it goes so far as to sweep in dormitories, et cetera. I know that at least some dormitories are run under that model.
I agree that that would, that sort of use would fall under 11A.
And that's all my questions.
All right, thank you. And actually, before we move on, I guess we should probably jump back briefly to Commissioner Bender's question on page number 47 about whether it should be the California or the Uniform Building and Fire Codes. Mr. Mogg, do you have an answer for that?
Some of our codes, my recollection is some of our more obscure codes, like the how the residential property maintenance code, are not part of the California Building Code and are part of the standard code. The intent of this language was just to refer to whatever is applicable. You know, you have to comply with whatever is applicable, whether that be the building code or some other code.
Would it be possible then to say California or uniform? Or would that create ambiguity?
That's fine. I'm just trying to pull up the exact section.
I think your microphone might be off. Your audio sounds a bit different.
Sorry, I was just trying to get to the exact page, scrolling down to 40.
17.62.020A.
Chair, while I pull up that language, sorry, I have the spinning wheel. If you want to move on, then we can circle back to that issue.
That would make sense, yes. Commissioner Hui, do you have any questions on this item for staff?
Yeah, I think clarification. Justin, earlier you mentioned 10% as a starting point for the density bonus. Is that correct?
It would be a 10% above whatever the state density bonus allows.
10% above.
Yes.
And then can you repeat again how that number was determined?
So we had some discussions with HCD staff when the city was applying for a pro-housing designation. One of the discussions was about this program as well, that density bonus above whatever the state density bonus would be for senior housing. So in those discussions, they suggested that 10% would be a good starting point to consider.
Are there other neighboring cities or jurisdictions that also do this additional bump? And if so, what are their numbers, if you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know some jurisdictions do provide a local bonus to whatever the state density bonus allows as well. So I don't think the city of Pinole has done that necessarily before. We've had allowances, based on like concessions that city council could consider, but this would be the first one like in the code that specifically has a quantified level for what the additional bonus would be.
Thank you.
All right, assuming that's all of your questions for staff, move on to Commissioner Lam-Julia. Do you have any questions for staff on this item?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Sandoval, do you have any questions for staff on this item?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Do you know which specific revisions have come from being mandated by state law versus ones that have kind of come locally?
Let's see. A lot of them are from state law. I think I've noted in the staff report items which ones might have, or it references a lot of the programs that they come from. But most of these do come from state law, just to ensure we're consistent. But for programs like the additional density bonus, that's coming like in part from the city.
Mm-hmm. And if bouncing off what Commissioner Huey had meant, what would be the process if we wanted to increase that? Would it be something that we would set, or would it be something that we kind of ask the city to investigate?
Yeah, I think that would be a way to do it, to ask the city staff to investigate what additional bonuses might be, and yeah.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
All right, Vice Chair Martinez, do you have any questions for staff on this item?
I do. And staff, thank you for all the hard work that's went into this, and to our colleagues here on Planning Commission that have brought all of this information forward to us today. I guess where I'd like to start is on item 1720 in the areas of from page 21 through 29. This is regarding the land use requirements for the family daycare. Specifically, I guess, let me share with you that I am a child, or the byproduct of this type of environment, where the preschool I attended was in a large family home with a large backyard. But interesting as life would take me along on the journey, I would become the board on preschool of a church that I belonged to. And in there were always state requirements here in California that dictated there was a certain amount of space, a certain amount of covered area, a certain amount of soft area. And then, if I remember right, they required us to change out the equipment on a semi-regular basis to keep up with whatever safety requirements that the state had. And I get a little bit nervous when I'm looking at some of the language in here about how we're moving from a conditional use permit to just making it permitted without any check and balance here in the city. So that's kind of one I need a little bit more information on. But then additionally, in a multi-family environment, if we move something like that under to conditional use, how's that going to impact the neighbors and the community? So if we can take some notes on that and help walk me through the thought process on how that would work, it would be really appreciated, because I could see that impacting a community. Maybe if I'm in a townhome and now it's been changed to this, and you know, what are the checks and balances for the neighbors around such businesses? Then when we move down a little bit further, my next questions are regarding the housing element in 17.38 on the density bonus. And the questions are going to be geared around page 33. So in Commissioner Huey, I thank you for starting down into this area, because this is where my questions started coming from, is when we're making specific changes, albeit required on a local basis or from a state mandated requirement to our housing element, are we now creating subset standards that we as a city, Pinole, are going to be required to meet these quotas in the future? And will we, if we're creating this, are we going to have the ability to renegotiate them at a certain point? So that could be somewhat of a slippery slope. And I want to make sure that if we are creating something, that we're very careful to say in our language that if we find out in the city of Pinole this isn't working for us, we actually have the mechanisms to roll back some of this, these guidelines. And then the other thing is, are we making these changes in our code to comply with the state changes? Are these really state changes? And are they really fundamentally what's right for Pinole? So at the end of the day, those are the questions I had for the staff tonight, and any guidance on that is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
So great questions, Vice Chair. So to answer your first question, state law requires that we treat the large family daycare homes, which is as residential uses of property. So we have to allow them by right in all these residential spaces. That's why we've made the change there. We can't require a conditional use permit. We can only require them to comply with the same rules that any residential use of property would comply with. So, you know, the setback, for example, but we can't require anything else like specific parking requirements or anything like that. So it has to be treated as a residential use of property. They're still subject to, you know, whatever licensing requirements the state might have for childcare facilities, but those are, you know, established and regulated by the state, not by the city. Regarding the your last question about what are we doing that's required and what are we doing that is optional, I would say overwhelmingly everything that we're doing in here is required by the state. The only major thing that really jumps out to me as something that's not required by the state is the bonus for senior facilities. And when I say required by the state, it's one of two things. Some of them are things that we are explicitly required to do by state law, and other things are things we are required to do because we promised to do them as part of our housing element in order to get our housing element approved. So, for example, the definition of family that's being changed, that's something, I don't think that's in state law itself, but that's something we promised as part of our housing element that we would make that change. And so theoretically, if we didn't do that, you know, in a timely basis, HCD could decertify our housing element. So I think that answers the first and third question. I have to admit, I forgot what the second question was.
I could probably touch upon the second one. I think Commissioner Martinez mentioned whether standards created could be like renegotiated or something along those lines. I guess the answer to that question is that it would be hard to reduce this standard once it's set, especially if we're talking about like the additional density bonus as well, like lowering that, especially if we've committed to doing a certain amount. And in furtherance of, you know, our housing element and state density bonus law, having a reduction in, I guess, incentives doesn't look very good on the city as well. So it would be prudent to consider whether the level currently is right and whether commissioners or city council, if they think there should be a higher one, that could be a subject for like further research and investigation as well. So the standard could be adopted, but there could be further exploration for like what a larger incentive might be in the future as well.
And also, I think the comment regarding what would happen to us if we didn't. Well, in terms of the implementation, it'll be affected more when we're not quite sure what's going to happen with the next housing cycle update and what's going to be, you know, looked upon in terms of that. So, but if we are implementing our existing housing element and we look to move some of those policies and stuff in the future, it lends us to be able to have a better working relationship with HCD and allowing to keep our housing element to keep getting approved, and that is a huge thing with everything that we do and everything that we require in terms of grants, in terms of HCD, in terms of CDBG and all that. You need a certified housing element. So a certified housing element is the key to probably 60-80% of funding that we get in terms of for housing and for those types of things. So we just need to make sure that we're consistent with HCD and consistent with state law.
And just add one thing to that. HCD has sent letters to cities saying, hey, you promised to do X, Y, and Z in your housing element by X date, and you haven't done that yet. Like, give us an update. They haven't yet decertified anyone's housing element, but in past cycles, you could say you were going to do something and no one ever checked ever. Like, it's clear that HCD is checking a little bit to make sure you're doing the things you said you were going to do.
And then I guess there's one point I'd like to highlight briefly, which is that the city has been designated as a pro-housing organization and has gained benefits from that designation. If we decide to, take actions which look like they're not in line with that designation, the state doesn't need to keep on giving it to us, I don't think. And to be clear, I guess that's sort of a direct question to the city attorney. The state does have the power to revoke the city's pro-housing designation if we do things that are not pro-housing, right?
That's correct.
And they can decertify our housing element if we're not implementing our housing element on a timely basis.
Certainly, but one of those things is a lot less drastic than the other. Vice Chair Martinez, do you have any further questions, or do you feel like there's anything that needs to be followed up on with staff answers?
I believe they've answered everything I have. Thank you, Chair.
All right, so now it's my turn for questions. And as a number of these items were already brought before the ad hoc Planning Commission committee, which I'm on, I've had several of my questions addressed already, but I do still have a few. One thing which I wanted to highlight was a reference briefly to page number 41 of this packet in reference to sort of the past understanding of local incentive. Basically, there's an item 17.38.060D, which says, unless otherwise governed by other funding sources, first priority for the affordable units will be given to individuals who reside, work, go to school, or have family in the city of Pinole. So I think that's basically the equivalent of the local preference, which is discussed in the new item on page 34 as 17.38.050F. My question with regards to that new section, 17.38.050F, is, doesn't most of the time the various tax incentives and so on that are set up around affordable housing basically preclude this from ever applying?
I guess the short answer is yes. Well, the short answer is no. It doesn't preclude it from ever applying. When you have a 100% affordable project that is receiving other incentives, usually those state or federal funding sources preclude something like that, because those state and federal funding sources aren't, for lack of a better phrasing, so locally focused, and are worried about sort of more, want to judge things more regionally. But it would still apply for many of the market rate projects that use density bonus and maybe are only 15 or 20% affordable. And that's how this has applied over the last few years in Pinole. So, for example, we couldn't apply it for the 811 San Pablo Saha project, which is receiving federal vouchers, but we did apply it in the sort of the other 1500 Fitzgerald. It's in that affordability agreement. It's in the affordability project for the for sale project. I can never remember the name because they're all
Village.
the same. So that we have been able to do it in sort of those market rate projects.
Okay, thanks. I guess I was sort of biased by the 179 unit senior housing one. I can always forget the name of that one. I just remember the number of units. Let's see. So the next thing I wanted to look at was, let's see if I marked it properly. I guess with regards to the approving authority. So I think ordinarily, apart from density bonus approvals, there's also a separate set of approvals that need to happen for affordable housing projects, because I seem to recall that usually comes back to the council for affordable housing in particular. Now, is that only for the 100% stuff, or is that for everything that has any affordable housing component to it?
There's no requirement for those projects to go to the council. Why they've normally why they've normally gone to the council, those 100% affordable projects, is because they are receiving some sort of funding from the city. So, like, we provided significant financial assistance to the 811 San Pablo project. So that's why they often go before the city, but otherwise there's no requirement. Now that this change will be made regarding the density bonus, there will be no requirement for these projects to go to the city council unless they are requesting, some sort of funding from the city.
Right, because again, I remember the 100% senior project also went there because that involves certain tax credits and so on and so forth. So I guess it would depend on the exact text of the various legislation and other fun things like that, which you need to know.
Particular project also required, my recollection is it required a general plan amendment. I can't remember if it was that project or the 811 San Pablo project that we amended this, the 3/4 specific plan to allow 100% affordable, which had not previously been allowed. It was one of those two projects required a specific plan amendment.
It was 811 San Pablo. Yeah. And not only that, I have a question, Alex. The affordable housing agreements still have to go to the city council for approval if these projects require. That got changed as well.
That here because those agreements are really sort of template agreements, like our ordinance says what the requirements are. And so there's not really, again, it sort of seems silly to bring an agreement to the council to approve when the code already dictate what would be in that. And it sort of creates a, I think, not the council, but the public thinks it's another opportunity for the project, even though those entitlements are already there. So it just seemed like an effort to streamline approvals and you know, get projects approved in a timely manner. There wasn't really anything being lost by not having those agreements go to the city council because the terms are already set forth in these agreements about what the length of time, the affordability level, preferences are all established in these agreements already. I mean, in the code already.
Okay, so it was giving the appearance of something being discretionary that was in fact ministerial. So would that not then just go directly to the community development manager and now come before the planning commission at all?
Agreement would just go, the project would still go to the planning commission for its entitlements. But the agreement, assuming you approve the project, the agreement could just be signed by the city manager based on the project that was approved and the requirements in the code.
Right, I just want to be clear about whether we're discussing something that's discretionary or ministerial, because if it's ministerial, then there's not really very much for us to do as a commission.
Yeah, that's exactly. We determined really that this was a ministerial function because after you approve the entitlements, based on what's in the code, it's really only a ministerial act to approve the agreement. You know, there's not really substantive things that are being changed or negotiated there.
All right, and then let's see. I guess going into the density bonus, so 17.38.030 B1 on page 33. 10% doesn't sound like a lot to start with, but the way that it's written, it sounds like it's basically a 25% increase in the actual density bonus amount. State density bonus is 30%. This lets it go up to 40%. So it may be more significant than we're thinking it would be. How did staff decide that this was sort of the right balancing point between too small to not have any impact or too large to potentially have unanticipated impacts and not be able to roll it back because of, you know, all the potential issues that you brought up earlier?
I think a lot of this just came from discussions with HCD on what they wanted to see in a senior density bonus increase beyond just the general state law standard. So they were the ones that brought up 10% as a metric to start with, to examine.
Okay, so this was HCD's preference then?
Yes, and it was for that pro-housing designation as well.
That's always helpful to identify. Okay, did I have any other questions? All right, I think that's all of my questions for staff. So at this point, I believe I will now open the public hearing. And I don't think there is an applicant making a presentation unless it's staff, and staff already did their presentation. So are there any members of the public that wish to speak in favor of the project?
I don't see any hands raised at this moment.
Are there any members of the public that wish to speak in opposition to this project?
Again, no hands raised, no attendees currently.
All right, and finally, are there any persons wishing to speak on this project without any particular inclination for or against?
None at this time, it appears.
All right, in that case, I will close the public hearing, there being no public commenters. And the item returns to the commission for discussion among itself and further questions of staff. So going the other direction this time, Commissioner Sandoval, do you have any comments or further questions for staff?
Yes, I was kind of wondering how the commission would be feeling about increasing the percentage for the density bonus from that 10%, or if we kind of just want to stick with that 10% because that's what HCD is kind of recommending.
I think that given the difficulties that staff has raised in potentially reducing that number in the future, and the fact that we don't know what the actual impact of increasing that value is going to be, then it might be a good idea to err on the side of lower to start with, and we're always free to raise it higher in the future if it works out well or if it proves to be insufficient. But that's just my opinion. Do other commissioners have comments on that particular topic? Commissioner Hui?
I would agree with the chair's statement, but I'd be interested to see if there's any local nearby jurisdictions who are doing that, what their percentages have looked like, and where they are now with the process. I think I'd be interested to hear those early adopters and see where they are.
Commissioner Lam-Julian?
I'd be interested to see what it would look like if we were to increase it, just to explore those options.
Okay, so I guess to sort of follow up on that question, could staff investigate what the process would be for increasing it while still moving forward with the current level as our recommendation?
Yes, I believe so. I think there are a couple directions you could take. You could adopt the ordinance at the 10% with the direction for staff to examine like what other jurisdictions are doing for additional density bonus beyond what the state standard is, and either bring it back to commission or like as a recommendation to city council to consider as well. It hasn't been.
For the city council. So if the commission wanted, you can, approve the recommendation for the council to adopt this these changes with direction to staff to explore other cities, and then staff can bring that information to the council, and they can, since they're the ultimate decision maker, they can then decide whether to adjust the amount or keep it as is. It seems like staff might have, correct me if I'm wrong, but might have time to do that research since this item hasn't yet been scheduled for the council.
Yes.
Yeah, we have time.
All right, so back to Commissioner Sandoval then.
Yeah, I would, so I think we still would want to go down. I don't know if anyone else had any other thoughts on that. But yes, I'd be open to having the city explore potentially increasing that. It seems like we don't have to finalize that specific item tonight. So maybe we can, if the commission feels that we can try to move forward and try to expand that, if still leaving it up to discussion for the other commissioners.
Vice Chair Martinez, since I can't see you, do you have any comments on Commissioner Sandoval's proposal?
None at this time, thank you.
All right, so it sounds to me like there's basically two different motions that could be made on this particular subtopic. And I think we can go ahead and make a motion of a subtopic and not be completely done with discussion for everything else. The first option is saying we're going with the 10% for now. We're directing staff to investigate and report back to the council with updates on what neighboring jurisdictions are doing along that line. The second option would be we're not going to pass this item tonight. We're going to continue it and ask staff to come back to us with that information so we can make that decision and then forward it to the council, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess my question first to Commissioner Sandoval is, which of those two motions would you prefer?
I think I'll prefer to. We can still approve the rest of the items and still kind of direct staff to explore these. So let me.
So the first one?
Yeah, the first one, and I can write it down and get it right before making the motion.
All right. So if you like, you could go ahead and start writing out that motion, and we can move on to further comments from other commissioners. So, Commissioner Lamjulia, do you have any comments on this item?
I'll wait for Commissioner Sandoval to make his motion and then comment. Thank you.
All right. Do any of the other commissioners wish to make comments while Commissioner Sandoval is drafting his motion, or do we just want to wait?
Sorry, I have a question to staff on the density bonus. I saw, technically speaking, I don't see there's a limit for density bonus. So theoretically, could a project have, say, 100% density bonus, theoretically in that sense, since it's not stated there's any hard limit, just at this moment, a minimum of 10%?
There are density maximums set by state density bonus law. So it also depends on like the type of development you're doing, who the occupants could be. So like seniors, students, et cetera. And also the affordability level that's being proposed in each project as well. There's a density cap that's based on state standards. And then this like 10% that's being considered would be in addition to that.
Sorry, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Sandoval, do you have your motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to direct staff to explore and investigate, then report back to the Commission and City Council on increasing the density bonus for senior housing projects beyond the allowed 10%.
And would that be to also approve it as is?
And approve as is.
That particular subsegment. Okay. Do we have a second?
I second.
All right. Is there any further discussion among the commission on the motion?
That's a clarifying question. When you say approve as is that and adopt the resolution 24-05 recommending to the City Council the adoption of the proposed municipal code and specific plan amendments as stated in the attachment?
Yes.
Oh, I was understanding it as just being that particular subclause because we're not done with discussion of everything else yet.
Did you want to kind of add this to the end then, or did you want to kind of go through all your questions and then add this at the end?
Well, I guess this is a question for the city attorney then, because the motion's been made and seconded, and we're having discussion on the motion. Can we continue discussion on the other items and then come back to the roll call vote on this, or does there need to be a vote?
You don't have to vote yet. The motion that was for adoption of the resolution that deals with the whole item. So if you have further comments on any part of the item, you can make them before you call the vote.
All right, so I think we're not going to be calling the vote quite just yet because I think there are some other comments that haven't been raised yet. So now that the motion's been made, and then Commissioner Sandoval, do you have any other comments beyond the motion?
No, I did not.
All right, Commissioner Lam-Julian, do you have any comments?
No, I do not.
Commissioner Hui, do you have any comments?
No, not at this time.
Commissioner Oosh, do you have any comments?
No comments.
Commissioner Bender, do you have any comments?
I'll just say that I do appreciate staff's, in terms of the density bonuses, not going through the very specific things that are outlined by the state this time around in this new document. Because of that issue that is potentially going to be changing from one year to the next. And as sort of a test drive to that is, I actually, there's a reference here, the California Government Code, Section 65915. I went and looked at that, and I saw all of the things that, Justin, you've been talking about, the percentages and so forth and so on for the various categories that potentially could be changing next year or 2 years from now. So I do appreciate staff not, or steering us away from having this sort of endless loop of revisiting what the state is determining in the future on those, like, those specific percentages. The only other thing is I'll say is when I read the application review that was on page 35, those two sections, 1 and 2, I have to confess I read it twice, and I wasn't sure what it was saying. The next day, I read it a second time, twice, and I began to understand what they were talking about. And again, that's the issue of who would be the reviewing body. Again, it was clarified in attachment B. It was, I'll call it just perfect English or non-legalese or non-bureaucratic language. It made it very clear. But otherwise, I really don't see a necessary change on those items 1 and 2. And that is it.
All right, Vice Chair Martinez, do you have any comments on this item?
No comments at all. Thank you.
All right, so moving on to comments. I think I made most of my comments under questions, frankly, but there's one sort of friendly amendment I'd like to make to Commissioner Sandoval's motion, which is in, where was it? There was a point that Commissioner Bender brought up later about the uniform code. I forget which page that was, page 47, that was it. We suggested having it be all applicable California or uniform building and fire codes. So a text amendment there. Would that be acceptable as a friendly amendment to the motion?
Yes.
Chair, let me explain a little bit further. The uniform code is something it's so-called model code. What happens is then California gets that uniform building code, and it actually modifies it. It adds things related to like seismic design for buildings. California was the first state to introduce to its code the Cal Green, which other states don't have because they're using the uniform building code. As an architect, when you design a building, you have to submit your plans based on the California Building Code. If you're living in another state, it would be the Uniform Building Code, unless they've adopted their own specific code in that state. So that's the distinction about that.
Okay, because if I understood Mr. Mogg's comments correctly, at least some of the things that the city does refer directly to the uniform code, not just the state one.
They could. I don't have a specific example off the top of my head, but I think it would address all concerns to just the original language as applicable. So to the extent the uniform building code or one of the uniform codes doesn't apply because there's a California code, then it would be the California code that's applicable.
So in your legal understanding, then, all applicable uniform codes would include the state uniform code within that superset?
For clarity, we could say all applicable all applicable,
Building and fire codes?
building codes and uniform codes, all applicable California building codes. and uniform codes.
That's why I suggested California or uniform building codes. But I'm not the lawyer, so I don't know whether that's the right technical
I think
language.
that is fine to say applicable California or uniform building codes. Because to the extent there's a California building code that applies, that would apply, not the uniform code.
All right, so for the procedure for a friendly amendment, does that need a second, or does it just need the approval of the motion maker?
It needs the approval of the motion maker and the second. That's
All right, so can I have a second to my friendly amendment then?
Oh, and Chair, before we proceed, I'd also like to suggest that a proposed revision that staff made to the family definition as well as part of the revisions.
Right, and also adopting the proposed staff revision in the supplied replacement text. And again, for chapter 17.98, which you would find on page number 50 of the original packet, changing it from all persons living in a household who to all persons living in a household whether or not, comma, whether or not. So I guess that would sort of be tacked on to the friendly amendment as well, if that's allowed to have multiple items in a friendly amendment. So can I get a second to my amendment?
Sorry to clarify, it's not a second to the amendment. I believe Commissioner Lamb-Julian had seconded the original motion. And so both the motion maker and the person who seconded the original motion have to agree to the friendly amendment.
Oh, I thought it was just the motion maker that had to agree. Okay, so Commissioner Lamb-Julian, do you agree to the friendly amendment?
I agree to the friendly amendment. Thank you.
I also agree to the friendly amendment.
All right, so the motion now before us is the staff instructions with regards to the 10%, looking at local jurisdictions, seeing whether there are other options with regards to that. A text that's provided by Commissioner Sandoval, amending chapter 17.98 on page 50 to include the staff suggestions whether or not instead of who, and the amendment to page number 47, changing it, or wait, no, that wasn't. Was it 47? Yes, it was 47. So 47, 17.62.020, changing applicable uniform to read all applicable California or uniform. And otherwise adopting Planning Commission Resolution 24.05 with Exhibit A as drafted, aside from those changes. Is that correct from staff's understanding of the motion and amendments to the motion?
Yes, I believe so.
And do any commissioners wish to discuss the motion and amendments to the motion further? Vice Chair?
No.
All right, in that case, I will call the roll. Mr. Hanham, can you please go as a roll call vote?
Sure. Commissioner Huey,
Yes.
Commissioner Uch,
Yes.
Commissioner Sandoval,
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb-Julian,
Yes.
Commissioner Bender,
Yes.
Vice Chair Martinez,
Yes.
Chairman Menace.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right, that concludes this public hearing item. We now move on to the next public hearing item, modification of conditional use permit 10-06 for the addition of live music and the approval of administrative use permit for permanent outdoor dining at 2300 San Pablo Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to kind of give the commission an update, we ran into some more information that we needed to gather for this project. And so I'm doing that right now. And I would have come back probably October 9th, but we don't have a meeting on October 9th, so we were extending it to the 28th. So, and then at that point, we'll be ready for the project. So, and that's all I have.
All right, so Because the staff recommendation is for this item to be continued, do we need to go through the ordinary public hearing process of opening the hearing, questions, et cetera, or do we go through the ordinary continuation process of motion and continuation?
Before you do a motion to continue, I would recommend you take public comment.
All right, so in that case, I'll go through the standard process. So do commissioners have any questions for staff on this item? Vice Chair, since I can't see you, do you have any questions for staff on this item?
No.
All right, then I will go ahead and open the public hearing on this item. Are there any members of the public that wish to make comment on this item, either in favor or against?
There are currently no attendees online, Chair.
All right, I will close the public hearing. Do any commissioners wish to offer comments on this item to staff? Vice Chair?
None.
All right, then I will make a motion on staff recommendation to continue this item to the regular meeting of October 28th, 2024.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Huey,
Yes.
Commissioner Uch,
Yes.
Commissioner Sandoval,
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb Julian, Commissioner Bender,
Yes.
Vice Chair Martinez,
Yes.
Chairman is.
Yes, and staff, did we get all the votes recorded properly?
Yes, motion carries 7-0.
Great. There's a brief audio glitch, so I wanted to make sure that everything got through properly. All right, that concludes the public hearing. So we have old business, there is none. There's new business, there is none. And we now have the city planners and commissioners report. So I will go ahead and start with Commissioner Bender for any such reports.
None.
All right, Commissioner Uch, any reports?
None.
Commissioner Hui, any reports?
None.
All right, Commissioner Lamb Julian, any reports?
None.
Commissioner Sandoval, any reports?
No.
Vice Chair Martinez, any reports?
None.
All right, and as for myself, I don't think I have any reports. There's some communications, but that's the next section. There is, however, the option for the city planner's report. So City Planner Hannum, do you have any report?
I have lots of things, Chair. No, just a couple of things. Again, staff, we're just going to give you an update of where we are in some of the processes that we're working on right now. Justin and I are working on phase 2 of the housing element implementation code changes. So we're working on those. So hopefully you'll have those to you here fairly shortly. Again, we're working on the parklet outlet designs, policies and guidelines for that. The objective development design standards will be probably to you guys by the end of the year, because it's got to go back to the ad hoc committee. You got to finish writing it up and go back to ad hoc and then come back to the commission. So I'm hoping to get that to you by the beginning of the end of the year. We also, just to let the commission know, after next meeting on the 23rd, we will probably only have 3 meetings left for this year. So just to let everybody know that we only have 1 meeting in October, 1 in November, and 1 in December. So just if we need another meeting, we have the ability to do that. But I just wanted to let the commission know we're coming down to meetings. So your next few meetings in October, November, December could be pretty packed because we got a lot of items that we might have for you. We'll also have, hopefully for you right around the corner, implementation, the housing implementation, part 3, phase 3 to you, probably in the first part of January, beginning part of February. And we're also looking for the safety and environmental justice elements. I've sent those off to the ad hoc committee to review. We'll be talking about those on Wednesday. And so looking forward to getting those back from the ad hoc and to the consultant. We get that. We're looking to have those approved in the early part of 2025. And then we also, the city is working on a grant application for sea level assessments and vulnerability assessments, and we're working with the county on that. We just started that process, so we'll be looking to continue that moving forward on that. And that's about it. So unless you have any questions about anything, I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Sure, I've got two questions. First off, I think, though, I guess other members of the ad hoc committee can correct me if I'm remembering this incorrectly, but I think we've only been sent the safety element so far for our review. I don't think the EJ element's been sent out yet.
I sent the EJ element out probably the day after I sent out the safety element. So if you didn't get it, let me know. I'll send it to you. You didn't get the EJ element?
No.
Okay, then that.
I didn't also.
Okay, then I'll make sure I'll send it out to you tonight before I leave.
Yeah, that's like I wanted to make sure to get cleared up, seeing as we're meeting in just a little bit under 48 hours.
Yeah, so I expect you to read it all, understand it all, and we'll have great discussion on Wednesday.
And then my second question was with regards to something that was mentioned in the minutes. There was a potential future update by you on the tree removal. Have you been able to figure anything out about that yet?
Tree removal, yes. I talked to, that was on, a couple of those were on city property. The trees were based on our arborist, which we have arborist on staff. Joe Bingaman was our public manager. One of them was on our site. The other two, I think, we're working with the property owner. Property owner cut down. So we're working with the property owner on that. So there could be some mitigation that needs to be involved in that process. So yeah, I did find out about the oak trees, but we cut down, I think, one or two of them.
All right, and the ones that were obviously on WCC USD property, that's their thing.
That's a moot point. So.
All right, so Commissioner Lamb-Julian?
Director Hannum, I forget the name of the project, but the one across the street from the middle school?
Appian Village.
Appian Village. Just several community members have reached out regarding the construction workers and their trucks coming in and out and just causing additional congestion with the drop-off situation.
Okay.
And then when they are, I guess the term is excavating, when they're digging, are they supposed to still be watering down the dirt so then it doesn't?
It should be. I mean, that's all part of the watering process. So I'll check with Public Works because that's all under the grading permit and all that they're required to do those things. So if they're not, then let me know.
Yes, that has been brought to my attention as well.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm complete.
Yeah, and I can definitely confirm from personal experience that at least at one point in the grading process, the dirt wasn't watered down enough to prevent it from blowing directly into my travel path in a vehicle. So,
okay. I'll work with the project manager tomorrow, so let him know.
All right. Commissioner Sandoval, do you have any questions?
No.
Commissioner Hui, do you have any questions?
No.
Commissioner Oosh, do you have any questions?
No.
Commissioner Bender, do you have any questions? No. Vice Chair Martinez, do you have any questions?
None.
All right, and I think I asked mine with regards to the report, so I think now we can move on to communications. And I'd like to note here to start with that the city's calendar is still not showing community events at all. It's just showing the meetings, basically. It's not, and the major events like the National Night Out. It's not showing stuff like the food drives or the blood drive or coffee with the city even or anything like that. So I don't know who in the city should be looking at that, but it's been a while since I last mentioned it and it's still an issue. So to start with my communications, I'm going to highlight some things happening this week that I managed to dig up in various city emails and reports and parts of the website. Tomorrow, there's going to be the senior low-income food distribution from 10 to 11 a.m. You need to apply for that either at the senior center itself or online on the city's website. On Wednesday, there's going to be Coffee with the City at, I think it's Panera Bread from 8 to 10 a.m. And there's going to be a Traffic and Pedestrian Safety Committee meeting I think at 6 on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, the 12th, there's going to be a blood drive. Let me look up the exact details on that one. Right, Thursday, that's going to be from 9 to 3 p.m. at the youth center, and that one also requires making an appointment online. And if you have any questions about that, you can contact the Red Cross at 1-866-236-3276. So that's all of the diverse communications that I'm aware of. And so now I'll move on to other commissioners for their communications, starting with Commissioner Bender. Do you have any communications?
No.
Commissioner Oosh, do you have any communications?
None.
Commissioner Hui, do you have any communications?
No.
Commissioner Lamb-Julian, do you have any communications?
No.
Commissioner Sandoval, do you have any communications?
No.
Vice Chair Martinez, do you have any communications?
None.
All right, so that closes out that item. And we move on to our next meeting, which is the regular Planning Commission meeting of September 23rd, 2024 at 7 p.m. And I will now adjourn the meeting.